Everything you've been told about the observer effect is basically right. They just got the reason wrong. It's not about looking. It's not about your eyes. It's your attention. And your attention collapses reality, right now, all the time, whether you notice it or not. Physics has a name for this: the observer effect. Most people who've heard of it treat it as a curiosity, a 100-year-old lab result, interesting but distant, something that stays inside a physics building. It doesn't stay there. If attention really does what it just did in that first sentence, it isn't confined to a lab, and it isn't confined to particles too small to see. It's happening in this room right now, whether you're tracking it or not. So the real question isn't whether it's true. It's what it's actually doing to the reality you're standing in, and why so few people explain it right. Most people who've absorbed a little bit of pop physics carry around one specific belief about why this happens. It's your eyes. Looking at something, they assume, is what does it. Some kind of invisible ray leaving your gaze and nudging the world into place. It's a tidy story. It's also not what's actually going on. It's an easy story to reach for, too, because it mirrors something you already know from ordinary life, the sense that things behave differently the moment someone's watching. A kid straightens up the second a teacher glances over. A stray cat vanishes the instant you turn to look directly at it, even though it was sitting right there in your peripheral vision a second ago. So the eyes do it explanation isn't a dumb guess. It's a reasonable pattern match, borrowed from 100 smaller experiences like that one. It's just borrowing from the wrong level of reality. Here's the experiment, stripped down to what actually matters. Fire particles, electrons, or photons. It doesn't matter which, one at a time, through two narrow slits, onto a screen behind them. Nobody's touching them. Nobody's aiming them at a target. Just one after another, drifting through. When nothing tracks which slit each particle goes through, the pattern that builds up on the screen looks like waves overlapping. Bands of light and dark, the signature of something spreading out and interfering with itself, taking every possible path at once and layering them together. That's superposition, not as a definition you memorize, but as a photograph of what actually happened. The particle wasn't one thing yet. It was a spread of possibilities, still open. Then you add a detector at the slits, something that registers which path each particle actually took, and the pattern changes. The waves collapse into two simple clumps, like you'd expect from a stream of tiny bullets. The spread of possibilities closes down into one outcome, every single time. For decades, the explanation offered for this was mechanical. Detectors disturb what they measure, shine light on an electron to see which slit it passed through, and that light physically knocks the electron off course. Case closed. No mystery, no consciousness required, just an unavoidable side effect of measuring something that small. Except that explanation ran into a problem it couldn't survive. Physicists built versions of this experiment, quantum eraser experiments, where the which path information gets recorded, but never physically disturbs the particle at all. Nothing jostles it, nothing collides with it, nothing that would count as a bump in any normal sense, and the pattern still collapses. Then they went further. They recorded the information and afterward erased it before anyone could look at it. The wave pattern came back, not the particle pattern. The wave pattern, as if the collapse had never happened at all. That's the detail that breaks the mechanical explanation clean in half. If collapse were only about physical disturbance, erasing information after the fact shouldn't undo anything. The disturbance already happened. The damage, if there was any, is already done. But it isn't. What actually seems to matter isn't whether the particle got bumped. It's whether the information about which path it took ever became something a conscious mind could know. Think of it like a text message sitting on a server the second after it's sent. It exists. It's recorded, stored, physically real, sitting on a hard drive somewhere as an unambiguous string of data. But it hasn't become part of anyone's story yet. Nobody's read it. There's no read receipt under it yet. The moment somebody actually opens it and reads it, that's the moment it stops being raw data sitting in a server rack and starts being something that happened to someone. Delete it, unread, before anyone opens it. And in every way that matters to the story of your life, it might as well have never been sent at all. it gets stranger. In the late 1970s, a physicist named John Wheeler proposed a version of this where the choice of whether to check which path information happens after the particle has already passed through the slits, sometimes billions of years after, using light from distant quasars as the source. If the mechanical explanation were the whole story, none of this should be possible. You can't physically disturb a particle with a decision you haven't made yet. And still, in every version of this experiment actually run in a lab, the result comes out the same. Whether the system ends up looking like a wave or like a particle tracks the eventual fate of the information, whether it's headed toward becoming knowable, not the moment the particle physically passed through. Push the message analogy one step further to see why that matters. Imagine someone secretly takes a screenshot of that unread text the instant it arrives, copies the words, stores them somewhere else, technically captures the information, but the original recipient still hasn't opened the message, still doesn't know it exists. Has the story already resolved? Wheeler's experiments suggest, unsettlingly, no. What seems to matter isn't whether a copy of the information exists somewhere in the universe. It's whether that specific chain, the one running through to an actual mind, has closed. That's not a metaphor physicists made up to sound poetic. It's close to the actual argument a mathematician named John von Neumann laid out formally in the 1930s, and a physicist named Eugene Wigner, who'd go on to win the Nobel Prize, pushed even further a couple decades later. Von Neumann traced the chain of measurement all the way through. Particle to detector, detector to recording device to whatever eventually shows the result. And at every one of those steps, you could, in principle, treat the whole system as one giant quantum object, still undecided, still in superposition. The chain doesn't resolve itself anywhere in that sequence. Something has to actually end it. Wigner's answer was blunt. The chain ends the first time a conscious observer knows the result. Not a camera, not a hard drive, not a machine printing out a number nobody's looked at yet. A mind, actually registering what happened. It sounds at first like exactly the kind of claim that gets waved away as fringe. It isn't. Or more precisely, it used to get waved away like that, before physicists started actually testing it. Wigner's thought experiment on this, a scenario physicists still call Wigner's friend, involves one observer measuring a system while a second observer, outside the room, has to treat the first observer as still unresolved until they get the result themselves. It remains a live, actively debated problem in quantum foundations research today, not a relic. Labs have started running small-scale versions of it with photons standing in for the friend, and the results keep landing in the same uncomfortable place. Where you draw the line that ends the chain seems to depend on where you decide to stand. Now, worth saying plainly, because this channel doesn't deal in easy certainty, that's not the only serious position in physics. Plenty of physicists explain the same experiments through decoherence, where the particle's aloneness just gets diluted by its environment, no consciousness required at all. Others reach for many worlds, where nothing ever really collapses, it just branches. The debate over which of these is actually happening hasn't been settled, and probably won't be anytime soon. But von Neumann and Wigner's version is real physics, from real, credentialed physicists, not internet mysticism dressed up in jargon. And it's the version that keeps surviving every attempt to explain it away with pure mechanism, because the quantum eraser keeps pointing at information becoming known, not particles getting bumped. If you're the kind of person who wants to sit with an idea like that instead of scrolling past it, subscribing means the next one just shows up instead of having to go looking for it. Sit with what that actually implies for a second. If Wigner's right, there's a real physical difference between a fact sitting unread somewhere in the universe and a fact that's actually landed inside a conscious mind. Not a difference in importance, a difference in what's real. The unread message and the read one aren't the same event with different emotional weight attached. They're structurally different states of the world. One's still spread across possibilities. The other's been pinned down, and the only thing that did the pinning was somebody paying attention. So bring this back down from particles in a lab to the life you're actually standing in. Attention. if it really does turn a spread of possibilities into one settled outcome at the smallest scale anyone's ever measured, raises an obvious question. Not whether that stays trapped down there in the world of electrons, but why anyone would assume it does. Nothing about the argument comes with a size limit written into it, not von Neumann's chain, not Wigner's conscious observer ending it. It's not, this works for particles, but obviously stops mattering once you zoom out to a life. That size limit is an assumption people add afterward, because it's more comfortable than the alternative. Think about something you've been half noticing instead of actually noticing. A relationship that's been running on autopilot, you're present in the room, but not really there. A skill you've technically been working on for months without ever giving it a single stretch of real, undivided attention. A version of your own future you've been vaguely hoping for, without ever actually holding it in your mind long enough to look at it clearly. All of that is sitting exactly where that unread message was sitting. Recorded. Real in the sense that it happened. Still nowhere near finished. Still spread out across a dozen half-formed versions instead of pinned down into one. Take the relationship running on autopilot a little further, because it's the clearest version of this. You can share a couch with someone every night, sitting right next to them, and still be somewhere else entirely. Half listening while planning what to say next, present in body while your attention's already 3 topics ahead. Nothing about that is dramatic. Nobody would call it a crisis. And yet, by the same logic that just took an entire experiment to explain, that's not the same event as actually being there. Recorded, yes. Happened, in the thin sense that a camera would confirm it happened. Attended to, closed, pinned down into one settled version instead of a dozen half-present ones. That's a different question entirely, and it isn't answered by presence alone. Picture the specific shape of it. A banking app that's been sitting on your phone with a red notification bubble you haven't opened in weeks because some part of you already suspects what the number says and would rather it stay a rumor instead of a fact. A doctor's message waiting to be listened to, voicemail icon blinking, because a rumor about your own body is somehow easier to carry around than the actual, specific sentence someone said out loud. None of that information is hidden. It's sitting right there, recorded, real, technically available the second you tap it open. What's keeping it unresolved isn't the world withholding anything from you. It's that nobody, including you, has actually landed their attention on it long enough to close the loop. Worth slowing down for this next part specifically, because it's usually the one people get impatient with. This is also probably the honest version of something you've heard called manifestation, stripped of the parts that don't hold up. Not picture a car and the universe delivers it to your driveway. Nothing in von Neumann's chain promises that, and anyone who tells you it does is selling you a shortcut physics never offered. What it does support is narrower and, if anything, more demanding. Outcomes that stay half-formed because nobody's actually closing the loop on them with real, sustained attention instead of a passing wish. The difference between wanting something and actually attending to it isn't a matter of degree. Based on everything this video just walked through, it might be the difference between a message still sitting unread and one that's finally been opened. Not because thinking about something extra hard magically rearranges matter around you. That's the version of this idea the internet keeps selling, and it's exactly the version that isn't supported by any of this. What Wigner's argument actually says is narrower, and honestly, stranger. Certain outcomes don't finish becoming real until something conscious actually lands on them, which means the parts of your life you've never really paid attention to aren't just neglected. In the strictest sense the physics allows, they're unfinished. If there's a version of your life you keep meaning to actually look at, really look at, not the version where it's running quietly in the background while you think about 6 other things, that's probably worth naming in the comments below. Not as a promise to the universe, as the thing you're about to stop leaving unread. Not because naming it out loud does anything magical on its own. It doesn't, and this video isn't going to pretend otherwise. But because naming it is usually the first moment attention actually lands somewhere instead of sliding past it one more time. Here's where it gets uncomfortable in a useful way though, because the same argument cuts both directions. Your attention doing something real, not decorative, not just focus in the productivity poster sense, but actually structurally involved in which version of events gets to finish happening. means where you keep placing it day after day isn't neutral either. Every rerun of an old argument you keep replaying instead of letting close. Every worst-case version of tomorrow you keep rehearsing in detail, not planning, rehearsing. There's a real difference. Every small, ordinary good thing you let pass by half-noticed because it didn't feel dramatic enough to deserve the real thing. The kind of attention that pins something down instead of just glancing at it. A body that's been quietly signaling something for months. A tightness, a fatigue that doesn't match how much you're actually sleeping, gets waved off as background noise instead of something you actually sit with and look at directly. Because looking at it directly would make it real in a way that's harder to keep ignoring. None of that means you're doing it wrong exactly. It means the mechanism doesn't come with a filter that only activates for the outcomes you'd consciously choose. Von Neumann's chain doesn't check whether the observer wanted this particular result before it lets the collapse happen. It just needs the attention to be real, sustained, actually landed, not which direction that attention happens to be pointed, which is worth sitting with instead of rushing past, because it reframes something that usually gets treated as purely emotional, rumination, dread, the habit of replaying an argument for the 40th time as something closer to a physical act. Every time attention lands on the worst version of tomorrow instead of the actual, unresolved present. That's not neutral background noise. According to the same logic that explains why a particle behaves differently once it's measured, that's an active participant closing a loop over and over on the version you'd least want finished. There's no clean instruction at the end of this, and that's the honest part, not a cop-out. Nobody's handing you a 5-step method for pointing your attention correctly, because that would turn a real, contested question in physics into a productivity hack, and it deserves better than that. What it actually asks of you is smaller and harder. Notice over the next few days how many things you're carrying around in that unread state. Not to fix them all by tonight, just to notice that they're there, recorded, waiting, in exactly the sense this entire video just spent explaining, not as a metaphor anymore. Which raises a question this video isn't going to answer for you, because nobody's found the edge of it yet, in a lab or anywhere else. If a mind ending that chain is what turns possibility into fact at the smallest scale, physics can measure. And if there's no clean argument for where that stops mattering as things get bigger, how much of what you're currently calling just how things are is actually still sitting exactly where that unread message was, recorded, technically happening, and still, in the strictest sense, anyone's been able to test, waiting on you. The takeaway worth carrying out of this one isn't the names or the equations. It's this. Attention isn't just how you notice reality. It's part of how reality gets decided. That's worth sitting with far longer than the runtime of this video. And it opens a stranger question underneath it, because if your attention alone can pin one system down, physics has already found cases where pinning down one thing instantly pins down a second thing, no matter how far apart they are, with no signal, no delay, nothing physically crossing the space between them. That's a different kind of unread message entirely, and this channel will open it next. Thanks for watching.